As my grandmother used to say, hang on to your hat now. Here it goes.
Bose.com.
In this country alone, and these numbers are hard to believe, more than 30 million people have lost their jobs in just the past 2 months. Across the world, the figure is likely in the hundreds of millions. Now, the authorities would tell you this destruction and suffering was caused by the coronavirus, but that's not true. The virus itself destroyed virtually no jobs. Those jobs, these economies, these families were destroyed by lockdowns which are ordered by politicians. The past 2 months, in which almost all businesses have closed and most workers have been ordered to stay home, have been the most economically destructive global event since the Second World War. Now, we've been assured repeatedly that all of this was absolutely necessary. The World Health Organization praised the government of China as a global model for responding because China quarantined an entire city bigger than New York City for 2 months. Top health officials told us we had no choice but to follow suit. Our politicians agreed, and they threatened to arrest anyone who didn't obey their orders. Not surprisingly, most citizens dutifully complied. As lockdown spread across the world, one country stood apart from the rest: Sweden. Unlike almost every other Western nation, Sweden steadfastly refused to lock down. Restaurants there stayed open, so did schools. Life remained, for the most part, fairly normal under the circumstances. Now, our media normally extol Sweden as the paragon of wise policymaking. They love Sweden, always have, soft socialism. And yet, on a dime, they turned. Suddenly, we were told that Sweden was, in fact, a corpse-strewn hellhole. Quote, is Sweden's lax approach to the coronavirus backfiring? Wondered Jeff Bezos' personal newspaper, The Washington Post. Sweden girds for thousands of deaths amid laxer virus policy, blared China-controlled Bloomberg. Sweden's government has tried a risky coronavirus strategy. It could backfire, wrote Vox.com. Vox.com, of course, is the very same publication that said any suggestion the coronavirus came from a lab had been, quote, debunked. As always, Vox was confident, smug, and totally wrong. What morons. At a briefing yesterday, Michael Ryan, executive director of WHO's Health Emergencies Program, said this about Sweden.
I think there's a perception out there that Sweden has not put in place control measures and has just allowed the disease to spread. Nothing could be further from the truth. I think if we are to reach a new normal, I think in many ways Sweden represents a future model of, if we wish to get back to a society in which we don't have lockdowns.
Oh, Sweden now represents a model. So after a month of sustained hysterics and propaganda praising the Chinese government's lockdown policy, in which people were locked from the outside in their apartments until they starved to death, after months of hearing how great that is, after incalculable damage to hundreds of millions of families, the World Health Organization is now telling us, almost casually, that actually our model should be Sweden. Now, who is the man you just saw speaking? Have you seen him somewhere before? I think you have. Just a month ago, that guy's model was not Sweden. It was Khmer Rouge, Cambodia. Watch this.
In most parts of the world, due to lockdown, most of the transmission that's actually happening in many countries now is happening in the household, at family level. In some senses, transmission has been taken off the streets and pushed back into family units. Now we need to go and look in families to find those people who may be sick and remove them and isolate them in a safe and dignified manner.
Oh, so we're just going to go into people's homes, presumably armed, and kidnap their family members if they might be infected. That was the World Health Organization's idea for fighting coronavirus just a month ago. It got virtually no publicity because our media, of course, agree with it. It was insane. That's pretty clear now. We're glad WHO is admitting it was insane, in effect, though it's not much comfort at this point. The World Health Organization has always been wrong about coronavirus. WHO told us it could not spread from person to person, a lie. They said the virus had been stopped and wouldn't spread worldwide, a lie. They said it was racist to talk about where the virus came from. Okay. They said that face masks were ineffective, indeed counterproductive. Again, those weren't simply wrong statements, they were lies, and some of them were very obviously told at the behest of the Chinese government, which controls the strings at the World Health Organization. So was promoting lockdowns a lie too? We can't say. We have no evidence. But at a minimum, authorities were once again incredibly, shockingly wrong about their prescriptions for fighting coronavirus. The strategy they pushed relentlessly, in fact, forced us to follow, hurt us in the end more than the virus they claimed to be fighting. And at the same time, they silenced anyone who dared disagree with their silly prescriptions. YouTube removed a video by two physicians calling mass quarantines excessive. In fact, just suggesting they might be excessive. Can't have that. It's against World Health Organization policy. Facebook took down pages for political protests and called them misinformation. So what did that misinformation consist of? It consisted of American citizens pleading for Swedish-style coronavirus policies, the very same policies we are now told by the World Health Organization are a model for the rest of us. Has there ever been a bigger screw-up? Probably not. But you know what there hasn't been? Even a second of self-reflection. For our professional class, our smug overlords, being wrong on the single most significant policy decision in living memory is no reason to abandon a sweeping power grab, which they are deeply enjoying. Today, Adam Schiff, let us remind you, one of the most powerful figures in government, he's the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, sent a letter to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, the tech monopolies, telling them to, quote, remove or downgrade opinions that he disagrees with. In The Atlantic, supposedly mainstream law professors called for a permanent switch to a Chinese-style censorship regime in which government and the tech monopolies have absolute power to silence ideas they don't like. 3 months ago, this stuff would have been laughed off the stage. Now it's everywhere all the time, and we're starting to accept it. Don't expect it to stop either. Protecting public health, it turns out, and this is becoming really obvious, was just an excuse, a pretext. For the people in charge, rolling back your rights and making you obey was clearly the goal. Bjorn Lomborg is president of the Copenhagen Consensus Center. He's author of The Skeptical Environmentalist, and we're happy to have him on tonight to assess what we're now told should be our model, Sweden. So, Bjorn, thanks so much for coming on. Were you surprised to hear World Health Organization hold up Sweden as a model?
Well, I think it's great that they're doing that. And honestly, Sweden is what you get when you ask experts to run the show. That's what they've been doing. Look, if we don't have a cure and we don't have a vaccine, which doesn't seem to be forthcoming, you really only have three options. You can just let corona rip through society, you can have moderate social distancing, which is what Sweden has done, and you can have a strict lockdown, which is what many states have done. Nobody's suggesting you should just let corona rip through. But likewise, you also need to understand that a strict lockdown is just simply not sustainable. You can't ask people to be locked down for months and months on end. And also, you're just simply pushing most of the deaths in front of you. And that's why I think it was inevitable. Sooner or later, we'd have to realize we'd all have to become somewhat like Sweden, a smart solution, something that tackles the issue and keeps the level of infection below the capacity of the healthcare system, but doesn't actually say we're going to have something that we can't live with in the long run.
Are you surprised by the hostility that Sweden, which has spent many decades being the object of sort of universal love from fashionable people, the hostility they receive for doing this?
Well, I mean, I think it's understandable that a lot of people say, here's a big dangerous disease, we've got to do something, and if you can actually just squash it by locking people down, it's an understandable immediate reaction. But you have to think of this in the long game. We're talking about a year, 2 year, maybe more, and you can't have a strong lockdown forever. And that's why I think you need to recognize, if you look at what most epidemiologists tell you to do, is to flatten the curve so that your health system can handle this. That's what Sweden has been doing. It's not actually locking everybody down, both because it has a huge economic cost and it actually doesn't solve the problem in the long run.
It doesn't solve the problem? Exactly. Bjorn, thank you for that. Following the science. Maybe we should have tried that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, Maine's a small state, so its government doesn't get a lot of attention. That's a shame because it's governed by one of the most mediocre people in America, Janet Mills. She's ordered her state closed for at least another month on the basis of no science whatsoever. One Maine restaurant owner
Well,
says
that's
she's
enough.
opening up tomorrow